Hey Dad, could this be the pirate fortress?
Larson, I don't know. Let's knock on the door and ask. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Goof Troop. In the last we started off the game and now it's time for Stage 3, the Castle. Which is probably my favorite stage in the game on the whole because I think it does a good job at having some unique stuff going on in it while also just having a kick-ass song. As well as just the cannonballs from the first dungeon of Link to the Past for some reason. So, this stage can be a little annoying in one regard in that, right here in this room we have a pretty good example of it. The game has pits. Some of them you can't walk into because they're just off a platform that's solid for some reason. Some of them you can walk into and there's no way to really know which one's which unless you fall into one first. Usually they do a good job of at least blocking you from walking directly off of them in some rooms because they'll put a lot of fences around them. But like in here, you have to be careful, otherwise you're falling off and that's a life lost. Even though lives are very easy to come by in this game, you're still probably going to want to hold on to them for as long as you can. Ow. So in here is actually one of the few times you actually have a pretty well hidden secret passageway, because you actually have to like throw that up there. And I don't know why, that just never really occurred to me to do on early playthroughs. It's not the most worth doing, but hey, it's a lot of free fruit and that gives you extra health, and you're probably going to need that at some point in here. Especially for the boss fight, because I'd say, by and large, the boss of this level is probably my... if it's not what I consider the hardest, it's at least my least favorite. Because I only really like the second and final bosses. Boss 1 I think is just annoying, Boss 3 goes on a little long, and Boss 4 goes on even longer. We'll talk more about that as we go, but now it's dark! And this is actually why I have the candle sub-weapon on. I guess you can call it a sub-weapon. It actively makes the circle around Goofy and Max larger. If you get rid of it, it's just small and it's really hard to see in, and the dark rooms in this game, they're pretty common moving forward, and sometimes there's enemies in them, which just makes progressing through them annoying. I'm not a fan of the darkness. I've said before that darkness level's already my least favorites in platformers 9 times out of 10. And it being here just kind of sucks. Thankfully, since the rooms in this game are always set layouts, if you know where you're going ahead of time, you don't have to worry about the darkness as much. But, It's also notable, around now, we actually start getting more rooms that are optional to visit. Like, you need to visit basically every room in, like, level 1 and 2. But, like, level 3 and beyond, there's optional side rooms that either go on a separate path that loops back to the main path at some point, or has extra items, or some NPCs you can talk to and all that jazz. I'm, by and large, just focusing on progression moving forward, so we're going to be taking what I believe is the shortest path in every stage moving forward. This cannon would be threatening if you couldn't just do this. So getting a little ahead of ourselves here, but let's talk about the staff on this game. This game has a pretty small credit sequence. In fact, getting a little ahead of ourselves again, next part. The credit sequence is like the final 6 minutes of the next video, but the actual credits is only like 2 minutes of that. The other 4 are like just an enemy scroll, basically. The main producer of this is Patrick Gilmore, who is all over a lot of Disney games at the time, and is still working in that kind of role to this day. Like, I think he worked on stuff like the DMC HD collection in that regard, technically, the Xbox One Killer Instinct game, things like that. The composer is Yuki Iwai, who was under the name Yuki Satomura at the time. She did a lot of composing on Mega Man X's 1 and 2. She did a lot of the Street Fighters starting from 2 and went all the way at least through the PlayStation 1 era. She was also the composer for the SNES Aladdin, I believe. And before we get into that, we actually have something a little interesting happening in the next couple of rooms, in that we're getting to this level's very unique thing. The puzzles in this stage take on a bit of a different form for this next little bit. Switch plates. Push the switches in the correct combination. We're gonna have floor pressure plates to step on. What word can we spell with the letters O, E, P, and N? I wonder. We have to spell open, so top left, bottom left, top right, and it will open the door to the top. And then we're gonna have another room of pressure switches we have to step on. This one is like the exact opposite combination, I think. I think it's top right, bottom left, top left, bottom right. Okay, no, I was actually wrong about it being the opposite. And there we go. Getting back to the staff. Notably, one of these, the scroll designer for this game, which I think might literally just be the scroll graphic, was one of the battlefield designers for some of the PlayStation 2 into PS3 Final Fantasies, Tsuyoshi Okahisa. One of the people credited as an object designer this is Toru Nakayama, which Mega Man Zero fans will recognize because they were the character designer for all 4 of the core Zero games, and I think they still did some extended art into the ZX games, so I think it was a different character designer at that point, who also worked on, I think, a lot of the original versions of Resident Evil 1 for some enemy stuff. One of the programmers, Toshihiro Fujikawa, notably worked on a lot of the Capcom Suda projects, like Killer 7, even leaving, I think, Capcom to still work with Suda into at least the PS3 release of No More Heroes 1? The other programmer, Shinya Okuda, worked a lot on just a lot of Capcom games programming side, all the way into at least Resident Evil 6. And I think even was still credited on the re-release that Onimusha 1 got a few years back, alongside the main programmer Masatsugu Shinohara, who worked on just main programming for a lot of Capcom games of the era. Dr. Wily's Revenge on the Game Boy, Ghouls and Ghosts. The last game I remember seeing on their Moby Games page when I was preparing for this particular video was, I think, Extreme 2 for Mega Man. But easily the funniest credit in this game, and the main reason why I'm even doing this whole section talking a lot about each of the credits, is the main game designer, who is Shinji Mikami, a name a lot of people are probably much more familiar with than the others, because he's the creator of Resident Evil. This was one of the earliest games he's credited on, period. From memory, I think he was only credited on 3 other games before this, which were the Capcom Aladdin on Super Nintendo, Super Buster Bros, a game I have never touched to this day, and the Game Boy Roger Rabbit game. And I'd like to note, date-wise, in terms of games, his next credit is Resident Evil, so he went from working on that to this. This to that, rather. But now it's time for the bosses. In this castle made of stones, I will crush you with my bones. I will fill your heart with dread. I will smash you with my head. Alright, this boss can be kind of rough, because not only do you have 2 targets to actively hit, and they both have a lot of health, but they have 2 attacks that kind of go in tandem well together for being annoying. The red skeleton throws 3 bone cross boomerangs that reach where you are in the screen and then bury in. They're always thrown at the same arc, where there's one thrown directly at you just about, and the other 2 to your sides. Meanwhile, Bluey over on the right here is going to throw 2 diagonally from them that will bounce off of walls several times before eventually burying themselves in the ground. You need to pick those bones up and throw them at each other. Thankfully, you don't need to, like, hit specifically, like blue will only take damage from red or things like that. They'll take damage no matter what. The further in they get on their health bar, sometimes they'll try to vary things up a little bit by throwing their head at you, which I think, I want to say you might be able to throw something at the head to damage them at that point, but otherwise, like, they're invincible, I think. And I think red can occasionally throw out ones more directly at you. The thing with this fight is I think it just has a little too much health. But that kind of goes into, I think, the boss fights. While they're probably one of the most interesting parts of the games to me, I think they needed something else, like another mechanic just for bosses to make them stick out a little more. But it's also a case of, if you can't tell by the open panel puzzle earlier in this level, this game's not exactly made to be super complicated. It's meant for young audiences. Like, this is not baby's first video game kind of difficulty, but it's definitely meant for, like, 4-year-olds kind of deal. Love that bone crunching sound effect, though. That hits the satisfying note in my brain. No matter what you do in this fight, once you take down one of the skeletons, the other one becomes much easier to take care of, if only because you have that many less attacks to track. And in that regard, I guess maybe taking out red could be preferable because you're taking out more projectiles by taking them out first. But I have a harder time following where the blue bones are going to bounce in the room rather than where the red ones are going to end up. And that's stage 3. Over halfway done. Alright, what do we got for a cutscene this time?
They think we're royalty, PJ. I kinda like being a pirate king.
Shh, Dad, they'll hear.
Servants more food. Being stuck in a whale sure makes you hungry. Ha 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 ha.
Okay, and now we're on to stage 4, which is probably the largest stage in the game and the easiest to get lost in because it has easily the largest side path that loops into one of the other pathways. And it's one I'm not taking, but it also has a pretty unique gimmick on its own over there. I might as well talk about it since we're not going to see it. There's an entire left branch that I don't take that leads you towards a minecart mechanic, where you need to either throw things at enemies to get them off minecarts, throw things from minecarts to just do damage that way, and just make sure you're on the right track. And it's kind of fun, but it's the slower way to get through the stage. Also, this stage introduces these red pirates, who can actively pick up things and throw them at you. You can catch them and just throw them right back at them, but they can also do that to you, so you might get some funny situations of just tossing back and forth constantly. I don't know why, honestly, I'm going after this particular set of 2 lives, because I don't need them. I would recommend grabbing one of the candles, though, because being a mine, there's a lot of dark rooms in this stage. In fact, I think it has the most out of any stage in the game. And it might be worth just having one of those around to help you see a little better on a first run. Oh, also, I think if you, like, get enough fruit rather, you just get an extra life by doing that. I think it's if you get up to 7 hearts, potentially, but I might just be confusing that with a different mechanic from another game. This probably is ultimately my least favorite level in the game. If only because, for one thing, there's ice physics over here and there, which are kind of annoying despite not being used a lot. But it just feels like it drags on a little bit too long compared to the other ones on top of its size. And I really don't like this musical track either, and it has probably the most boring boss fight to me. Yeah, especially this music. I don't like how it drones, especially the background beat of it. Like, where you just kind of have this blum, 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 blum. It almost kind of gives me a headache, which is rare for a game to really do that to me now that we're past the era of, like, a lot of handheld stuff. Because I got more headaches as a kid playing on, like, my Game Boy and my 3DSs than I did my consoles. On the large, depended on how I was playing a game in some cases, because I distinctly remember as a kid, I would be playing video games in the basement, but I would be using a larger LCD screen. And I would do this thing where I would split screen it. I would have the TV running on the left, and that's where the audio would be, probably. And I would be playing a game on a smaller half of the screen to the right. And looking back, wow, my ADHD's always been so bad I needed multiple things around me, huh? That's not just an internet era thing for me, that's really just, oh, yeah, no, that's always been there. Whoops. I have a lot of memories distinctly doing that with, like, Mega Man X4 for some reason as well, and I don't know exactly why with that. I got, like, distinctly memories of watching, and this is gonna really date when I was growing up, Sweet Life of Zack and Cody on the left, while Mega Man X4's anime cutscene of Zero versus Colonel played on the right on a smaller screen. And then I think I went to Foster's home or some shit after that. This room can be a little stressful despite it not being, like, dangerous. Because what we have to do here is to take out these 2 pirates and then get rid of all those barrels on the far left side. Because the bomb block that we have to kick up there to get to the star panel up in the top left doesn't have a long enough timer for you to kick it and walk all the way here while those things are still there. So you just need to kind of rush it and hope you get there in time. And usually you got enough time, but it's one of those where it's just tight enough that it feels a little uncomfortable, but that's also kind of the point. The game does have a pretty steady difficulty curve for its actual puzzle rooms. There's only really one, I'd say, that's really annoying on the no matter what required main path. And that's, by and large, the last actual puzzle in the game anyway. And if memory serves, this room right here, I want to say, is where the 2 routes to this stage connect. because from here on it's just a straight shot to the boss fight anyway. Be careful of the red larger pirates, because they breathe fire, and I think they're completely invulnerable while they're doing so. You might be able to stun them out of it with a hook shot if you have one, but you're not going to have one at this point anyway. Barring just some real roundabout ways of bringing one in here. Actually, wait, no, actually, this is the hardest puzzle in the game. The last puzzle in the game isn't as hard as this, because it's one of those puzzles that's not hard on its own. It's hard because of what you have to deal with on top of it, and you have to slowly just figure out what's where in this room through the darkness, and on a first playthrough, this is kind of rough, on top of the fact that there's just enough blocks that it seems confusing. But yeah, from here, it's just a pretty straight shot to the boss fight. Be careful of the enemies in this room, though. That got a little close. Thankfully, if you do die in this game, as we've seen before, it's not like you're sent back to the beginning of the level or even the room you're in. You just respawn where you are. It's, I guess, sort of arcade-styled in that regard, which is pretty neat. Because if you were, like, sent back to the start of a room, it would just kind of suck. I have a very strange habit with this puzzle, and I don't know exactly why I started doing it. But what you need to do with this puzzle is destroy that block over there with the wall, and then get the other blocks up to those two panels, of course. But in my brain, I always need the mental reset of leaving the room after destroying the bomb block to get up there. And I don't know why, because I don't think you actually need to do that. It's just what I've been doing for the better part of like a decade now. And I don't know why. And now we're right before the boss fight, and this room actually gave me some trouble just because I didn't realize you could really walk around the fence here on the first playthrough. I just felt like that was too small of a space, and in my brain I was like, oh, do I need to somehow bring a hook shot into here to actively throw things at these guys? But no, you're fine. With that, now it's time for probably my... I'm between, I guess this is my third least favorite boss fight, but it's the most tedious boss fight in the game. We got caterpillars. Two very large ones. They will crawl through the screen, cause a rumble, cause some stalactites to fall, you pick one up, and then they start moving again. Throw it at their head to do damage, but when you damage them, they rush to the opposite side of the room from where they are. They randomly select a hole to peek out of, and then they move to the exact opposite side of the room, hit them while they're moving. Each time you hit them, they lose a segment, and they move faster as well because of that, even though it feels like they should probably move slower. The big thing to note is you don't need to destroy every segment of a caterpillar. Once you get them down to 4, they die. Which feels a little weird, but I guess it's better than nothing. To start, they do actively alternate which one is peeking out and moving. But once you get at least one of them, I think, down to like half health, they both start moving at once. And it can be a little tough to move around in that scenario just because the only really truly safe place in the room is in front of the door. But even then, the stalactites might still be able to fall on you down there, so be careful. Thankfully, there's just enough stalactites that fall that you'll probably be able to grab one no problem, but also you need to keep in mind the throwing arc, because when you throw an item, it does actively like go up and then down, and these caterpillars are low enough that it's pretty easy to miss them. I think my problem with this boss fight is its pacing. It just feels slow enough that it's annoying, on top of the forced vibration and then falling stalactites every time. The other bosses feel a lot more graceful with how they integrate throwing items in comparison. And now I got both of them out. While the entire game on the whole does benefit from co-op mode just for the fun factor of it, this boss especially benefits from it because you can grab 2 stalactites at once and potentially just have extra hits stored up, and especially once both millipedes start moving, you can probably hit them both at once and just get the fight over more quickly. And that's always the kind of the gambit you run with games that are this co-op centric. Like, there's some portions of it that are made simpler by single player, especially with any changes that the game might have design wise for single player specifically. And there's some sections that play out better in co-op. It's just kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. Sacrifice for the system sort of deal, I guess. And I'm used to seeing it in games at this point. It's just kind of how things have to be for things to feel good, I guess. They also start dropping more stalactites as you go through. I forget if I mentioned that already, but again, that doesn't really matter as much unless you're playing on co-op. Something that would also probably help the bosses feel a little better in this game to me is if they actively had visible health bars, and I guess this one technically does because of the visual deterioration of the bugs, but just like having even like a number on like the top of the screen to be like, here's how many hits it has left would help a lot. Because knowing how close you are to the end of a boss is surprisingly important in my eyes, at least in platformer and puzzle-centric games. RPGs, not as much, though having a way to check the health of a boss is still pretty cool. Like using a scan spell or something like that. Having just finished 11 games worth of Trails, the visible health bar that those games have for every enemy, including bosses, is still pretty good though. Let's see, one more shot I think will do it. There we go. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, we're gonna go finish off the game. See you guys then.